let's talk about storytelling with your photography. Now, this can be very difficult. People say all sorts of things. You know, they say that your photograph should tell a story, and often what they mean is one single photograph ought to tell a story. That's very difficult to do. I find it, I'm not sure that I've ever looked at a photograph and felt as though I've seen a story. And I think it's because when I think about story, first of all, I think about, now this is very basic, but let's think about a beginning, middle, and an end. I'm not so sure that one single photograph can portray that. Now, maybe it can. I don't necessarily want to argue against that. Just because it would be extremely difficult doesn't mean that it would be impossible. But I like to think about storytelling with photographs with a series of photos. So I have a series of photos here that I'll walk you through. Now, I prefer to capture candid moments, something more like watching an improv team versus watching actors. So if you think about posing people in your photos, they're kind of like actors just following the script. Whereas in improv, they're following an idea and they're kind of making it up as they go. So when you think about stories, they are often made up of larger, you could think of an act, like a 3 or 4 or 5 act story. You can think about the different sequences of scenes, collections of scenes, and you can think about even inside an individual scene, there's little beats. So let's start with the beats. Basically, there's back and forth between the characters. So, I mean, we can look at this first photograph here and see that I'm focusing on the details. And then we can look at the second photograph here and see that now I'm kind of focusing more on the whole scene and the people in the background. They're now starting to come into play. Now the little girl pulls a chair out for her mom. Okay, so there's a beat. Then her mom sits in the chair. Then the little girl pours her tea. Then mom pours her tea. And so we get these little beats going back and forth, until finally we hit a moment of sort of resolution or turn. Now, things can turn in a scene. When a scene turns, it usually turns for the better or for the worse. So it could be bad and it turns toward the good. It could be good and it turns toward the bad, right? So I could be taking a picture of a child running around having fun, and then he trips and falls. And now the scene has turned bad. And yes, I photographed those scenes. I feel like a monster doing it, but the scene turns again. So the scene, it begins with the child running. Then the scene turns when the child trips and falls and cries. And then the scene turns when mom or dad come and scoop them up and embrace them. And then the scene turns again. I mean, we're kind of flowing into different scenes here, or at least different moments within the scene. And it turns again when the smile comes on the face and they're ready to get down and run again. So while I felt like a monster photographing a kid crying, it's part of a larger story that's going on. And how do you really appreciate the love that that parent is showing that child if you didn't see the child fall? You know what I mean? If they fell, there may as well be a picture of it. There may as well be a story so that we understand what we're seeing. And you can see why I find it very difficult to capture an entire story in one photograph, even an entire scene, when you think about stories with beats and with turning points. So now things can also turn from good to better or from bad to worse. So here I think we go from the tea, so we got them entering into the scene, pouring each other tea, then they get to have the tea. There's kind of a little resolution there. And the scene turns for the better because then they bring out cupcakes. And now look at the emotion on the face. The emotion really stands out and they start laughing and everything. Now the scene turns again and things start to get very playful and messy. And then the scene turns again. Things calm down. So really this is not being a kind of story where things go from good to bad or bad to good, right? There are no tears, there are really no negative emotions in here. But what we do is go from, good to better in many cases. We even have many stories have a battle scene. And the battle scene might be fighting with swords or guns. The battle scene might be wrestling or karate or something. It might be the closing argument in a court case. This battle scene is with the icing. And they have a little back and forth with the icing. It can be a positive, playful battle. And then they sort of settle down, and basically everything returns to normal. The little girl pours her mom some more tea. There's a little smooch from her mom. Again, the emotions are getting deeper. As you're moving through the session, you want to try and build, if at all possible. When the beats go back and forth, it shouldn't just be, somebody smiles and another person smiles back, and then the first person smiles again, and then they smile back. That would just be boring. You want it to build. So you go from, the little girl pulling out the chair and mom pouring tea and the cheers and the cupcakes and then the battle with the icing on their faces, and then we return to that calm moment where it all began with the pouring of the tea. But even the kiss on the cheek, we haven't seen kissing yet. At least I don't think so. Have we even seen a hug? We haven't even really seen a hug. Now, I left some photos out. I'm going to show you a few more photos in a second, and talk about another concept, why you would use some photos over another. But it builds, and then something new happens. Again, there's another turn. They're reading books, and then they have a quiet moment together, and then they leave. Now, this is where I love these little surprises to happen, because they're leaving and they're walking away, and you think the story is over, right? It ends just as it began. But then the little girl turns to her mom and says, "Hold on a second, Mom." And she goes back, and now she breaks the fourth wall. And notice this is the first time in this story that either of these characters have looked at the camera or have looked at the viewer. What's the fourth wall? It's this concept. It's the division between the actors and the audience. And so on TV, it's kind of like your TV screen is a fourth wall. Think about a comedy literally happening in somebody's living room. You can see three walls, and your TV is the fourth wall. And only very rare TV shows or movies do the actors actually turn to the camera and speak. When we're talking about comedies, love stories, dramas, all that kind of stuff, thrillers, generally they don't turn and look at the camera. So now the fourth wall is broken, and this sucks us right back into the story. I think that this really builds. This is a really powerful moment to me because of the fact that she looks back, and because it's funny. It turns to comedy. She comes back. What's she gonna do? She's gonna sneak a cupcake. But we can see, even though Mom's out of focus in the background, we can see that Mom has turned to see her, and she's been caught. And the final note of this story stuffs the cupcake in her face, and end scene, end story. So now I intentionally did not allow them to break the fourth wall, even though I took tons of pictures where they are looking at the camera. I weeded those out for the purpose of storytelling. Now I'll get rid of those stars and bring back a few photos that I left out. And there's also another little storyline here that I wasn't sure whether to keep in or not, because they move away from the table. So they're drinking the tea. They're drinking the tea. They're reading the book and drinking the tea, and then they're sitting in the grass. And so, but even it's a nice little scene, a nice little story in itself, even if it's not part of the larger tea party story. Here, obviously, Mom and Dad are reading a book together. They're both engaged and happy. A scary scene happens, and then it turns into laughter, and then look at the resolution. Look at how she snuggles into her mom. She was not that close to her mom at any other point. In fact, she seems to be leaning away. There's almost something going on in this story that repels her until the tension breaks, and then she cozies into her mom. So even this scene here is this 5 pictures or four pictures, and you can see the build. You can see the beats. They're engaged. They're scared. They're laughing. They're snuggling, and it builds, and there's a climactic scene here. Now, but imagine that I left those out and that we weren't really looking at them right now. Here are a few photos. Let me just isolate them. And it's being a little bit of a pain here. Is equal to, okay. And so here are the one star pictures that, they're part of the story, but I decided to leave them out because of the way that they're looking at the camera. They're great. They're great photos and important to the entire session. But in terms of just telling that little story in there, I didn't want to break the fourth wall until we actually got to the end of the story, because I found that it made it so powerful. I needed to save that really big moment for the end. And I felt like there was just a really good, really great moment here where she looks at the camera. Okay, so think about those storytelling techniques. First of all, you can decide to pose them, and then it's like a scripted story, or you can let it be candid, and then it's a little bit more like improv. Remember, you're going to have little beats, little back and forths between whoever is in your photos and what they're doing. Even if it's a person riding a horse, there has to be a back and forth between the horse and rider in your pictures. There needs to be some kind of turning point, a few turning points, some transitions. There needs to be, a turn from good to better, or from good to bad, or bad to good. And things should build as you go along. And then consider whether you want to break that fourth wall or not, whether you actually want them looking at the camera. It's perfectly fine if you do. Think about a documentary. Documentaries tell a story, and often people are looking at the camera in a documentary. So there we go. Have fun. Do some kind of storytelling project. And if you could provide a link in the comments to where your story is online, where your photographs are online, I would love to see it.